Rivalries are an important staple of sports. Whether it's a rivalry between teams, players, whatever the case may be, it adds an entirely new element to the games or matches that you're watching when there's a healthy dose of bad blood between the two. Some sports definitely do a better job than others of fueling and marketing these rivalries. European football has their fair share of rivalries with Barcelona and Real Madrid, Arsenal and Tottenham, or even just simply Ronaldo versus Messi. The NFL has plenty of rivalries thanks to the importance of divisions within the separate conferences and the implications that your standing in your respective division has on your playoff hopes. There's already an inherent rivalry between the teams that share your division, but even deeper rivalries have developed over the years, like the rivalries between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Cincinnati Bengals, a rivalry that spans all the way back to the 1970s, but continues to be consistently fueled to this very day. Even baseball has deeply rooted rivalries like the Yankees and the Red Sox, the Dodgers and the Giants, or the Mets and the Phillies. Now, the NBA used to have rivalries, and one could argue that it maybe still does to a certain extent, but definitely not quite to the extent of what they used to be. The Lakers and the Celtics was an important rivalry throughout the NBA's history, spanning all the way back to the earliest days of the NBA with George Mikan and the Minneapolis Lakers when their dynasty was supplanted by the new kids on the block, Bob Cousy and the Boston Celtics. The rivalry, of course, carried over throughout the late 20th century, with Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell each championing their respective East Coast and West Coast squads, then transitioning to the Magic and Bird eras before cooling off for roughly a decade until both teams would meet again in the late 2000s and then in the early 2010s to reignite the rivalry. But it was a short-lived resurgence of the NBA's most storied rivalry. There are, of course, other rivalries throughout the history of the NBA, but none really seem to capture the magic that a lot of other professional sports leagues do. Don't get me wrong, there are plenty of rivalries that have deep roots, but they just aren't big factors anymore, like the Bulls versus Pistons, due in large part to the fact that both teams haven't been major factors in the championship picture for quite some time now. These kinds of historic rivalries won't ever go away. They usually just go dormant until the stars align and both teams are competitive enough again for them to have the potential opportunity to meet in the playoffs. Those aren't the kind of rivalries that I'm talking about. I'm talking about new rivalries, or rather the lack thereof. There aren't many new team-centric rivalries, despite ample opportunities for them. I think a large reason behind this is due to the fact that the NBA is largely a player-focused sport now, rather than a team-focused sport. We used to have the Warriors and the Cavs rivalry, but that cooled off significantly since LeBron's departure to Los Angeles. The NBA will oftentimes market LeBron versus Steph as the primary rivalry, rather than perpetuating anything team-centric. And from a marketing perspective, I get it. It's a lot more advantageous to market LeBron James versus Steph Curry, two of the biggest names in the entire league, as opposed to marketing the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Golden State Warriors, especially now. The Warriors are still a major factor in the championship picture, but the Cavs are just now getting back to a team resembling a contender after a rebuilding phase post-LeBron. The problem with new rivalries in today's NBA is that these rivalries don't arise from the teams that are involved, they are based on the players that are involved. And at this point in the league's history, it's hard for rivalries to spring about organically. Players are more mobile than ever, and so even if there are some temporary rivalries that spring up on occasion, they're usually pretty short-lived. There was supposed to be a rivalry between the Thunder and the Houston Rockets, predicated on the fact that James Harden left OKC to go to Houston, and after being a sixth man for the Thunder, he became a historically great player with Houston. That rivalry is almost non-existent now because Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, and James Harden are no longer with their former teams. You can even look at the rivalry between OKC and Golden State when Kevin Durant left after the Thunder blew a 3-1 lead to the Warriors in the 2016 Western Conference Finals. Sure, there were some electric regular season matchups the year after that, but it was pretty one-sided, and it was pretty much extinguished once Westbrook and Kevin Durant moved on from OKC and Golden State, and that matchup just became another game on the schedule. While these player-centric rivalries are definitely exciting during their time in the Sun, they cease to exist once the players that rivalry is predicated on are no longer with the teams in which that rivalry was fostered, and they usually follow the players that are involved to their next stop. And that is why the new rivalry between the Pelicans and the Suns is so refreshing. You could make the argument that this rivalry is player-based, given that Chris Paul was initially drafted by the New Orleans Hornets, but his time with the Hornets was largely spent playing in Oklahoma City due to Hurricane Katrina, but he would develop into an all-star caliber player during his time in New Orleans, leading the team to a franchise record 56 wins. He would lead them to the postseason 3 times, but due to the lack of progress and due to the fear that they would lose him in free agency, New Orleans actively pursued trades to try and ensure that they didn't lose him for nothing, ultimately sending him to the Los Angeles Clippers. So yes, Chris Paul did formerly play for the New Orleans organization, but things seem to have ended on amicable terms between the two parties, with the friction seeming to come more from the front office and Chris Paul. Additionally, it's not as though there's really much left from Chris Paul's time in New Orleans on the roster or in the organization as a whole that could really harbor any bad blood. This is what makes the rivalry a lot more organic to me. The real spark for this rivalry came during the 2022 postseason, specifically in the first round, where the Pelicans snuck into the playoffs behind an incredible last stretch of the season from Brandon Ingram and orchestrated by the rookie head coach Willie Green. They had the luck of running into the first-seeded 60-win Phoenix Suns, led by head coach Monty Williams and the backcourt duo of Devin Booker and Chris Paul. Did I mention that Willie Green played alongside Chris Paul under Monty Williams' first season as a head coach back in 2011 for, you guessed it, the New Orleans Hornets? Even further, Green was an assistant coach under Monty Williams during the Suns' 2021 finals run before accepting the coaching gig with New Orleans. While there may not have been any bad blood between Williams, Green, and Chris Paul during this first-round reunion between the former trio, there was certainly some fostered between the players, specifically Chris Paul and Jose Alvarado. Jose Alvarado was consistently being a thorn in Chris Paul's side throughout the series, forcing him into 8-second violations and sneaking the occasional steal. These two were jawing at each other all series, and it's clear there's no love lost between the two, as made evident by the fact that this beef carried over into this year's regular season matchups. In their second matchup of this year's regular season, the Pelicans would come away with the win with a final score of 128-117, evening the season series at 1-1. In the closing moments of the game, Chris Paul would attempt a layup, I suppose to try and bring the Suns back within striking distance with 11 seconds remaining. The Pelicans would get the rebound before Zion gets the pass, and then he does this.
No. Get it done. And on the spin and the reverse, the slam by Zion.
The Phoenix Suns subsequently took issue with that, hearkening to an unwritten rule in basketball that when the game is over, don't try to run up the score. The counterpoint to this being that Chris Paul had literally tried to score the ball just moments before this. If you don't want the other team to score, if you want them to stop playing, maybe don't keep trying to score, or maybe don't let them get ahead of you in the first place. This incident ignited immediate shoving of chests and a lot of holding each other back, and even Monty Williams and Willie Green could be seen jawing at one another. Chris Paul even hit Jose Alvarado with a subtle elbow to the chin. Now, eventually the teams were separated, and we were treated to some incredible sound bites from some of the involved players in their post-game interviews, with Zion in particular giving arguably the best.
But the dunk at the end, I guess, why did you decide to put that one up?
That was a little out of character for me, but you gotta understand. I mean, you can understand it or not. They sent my teammates home last year. I missed all last year. I got carried away a little bit. I admit that. But, I was in that locker room when my brothers were down because, the Suns sent us home last year. That's a tough moment to be a part of. So, in that moment, I got carried away. I admit that.
Cameron Payne called out Zion for a lack of sportsmanship, although there was no mention of Chris Paul attempting to score seconds prior to the supposedly unsportsmanlike dunk. This rivalry doesn't just exist on the backs of the players. Rather, it existed before and has subsequently been fueled by the players. It's one thing for a rivalry to be birthed as a result of locker room drama that results in the departure of a franchise player. It's another thing for a rivalry to spawn as a result of heated matchups between the teams, which is the way that organic rivalries are born in the first place. From there, it's on the players to add fuel to the fire, and so far, the NBA's newest rivalry has delivered. I know this was a little different from my usual content, but if you guys enjoyed this video and you want to see more like this, let me know in the comments and be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Thank you guys so much for watching and supporting me, and I'll see you in the next one.